Hello friends, my name is Dimitri, this is Secret Level Brewing, and today we're making a monster barrel-aged stout. Let's do this. So the story begins last summer where a couple of friends and I got together to make an absolute monster of a stout. We had found a 15-gallon barrel on a Facebook marketplace that a local distillery was selling, and it was actually a 15-gallon rye whiskey barrel that was from a local distiller. We got it a good deal, and we love barrel-aged stouts. So we're like, let's fill this ASAP, let's make a mean stout and do it. So that's exactly what we did. We got over 100 pounds of grain that we mashed in between two mash tuns. So we had the mash tun you'll see over on the right side, which is a spiked mash tun, and the cooler you see on the left side, which is a 50-gallon cooler, and we filled that with a whole ton of malt. And we mashed that in on a super hot summer day. We smoked cigars and had a good time, but here's what we put into the mash tuns. So here we go. We used 35.9% raw or two-row. Then we added 10.6% crisp chocolate malt, 10.6% malted oats, 10.6% Thomas Fawcett pale chocolate, 7.4% roasted barley. Yeah, that's a ton of roast, but we'll talk about that. 5.3% Simpson's brown malt, 5.3% Simpson's double roasted crystal, and 5.3% honey malt. So yes, tons of roasted grain, tons of adjunct malts, and that's because they're awesome. The last three malts that I covered, I've been adding into all the big beers that I've been making, and they've been coming out exceptionally well. They just add something totally unique on their own, making something super chocolatey and just super rich in flavor. The honey malt adds this like crazy caramel note, so does double roasted crystal, and I've seen brewers use double roasted crystal in barley wines and big stouts all the time, and those are all come out awesome. But yes, tons of roasted malt as well. We have 10% chocolate malt, we have 10% pale chocolate, and 7.5% roasted barley, which sounds bonkers, but let's think about this, right? We're gonna have a very big beer with a very high finishing gravity, and on top of that we're going to age this beer for about a year in a barrel. So the malts are going to mellow and the sweetness is going to take over a little bit, so we want there to be some malt presence when we take this out and all the sugars in there. So that's exactly what we're doing. On top of that, if that wasn't enough malt and gravity, because we got terrible efficiency out of the cooler, it was like 50% efficiency at best estimate. We also added 10% liquid malt extract. And on top of that, we boiled this beer for about 2.5 hours, adding about 77 IBU and a full 8-ounce pack of Sriracha Ace hops, which to me sounds like Sriracha. And that was a hilarious part of the video. How many Sriracha hops?
How much Sriracha Ace? We go 8 ounces, 12 alpha. Okay. Never going to use it for anything else, so good riddance.
And then we boiled this beastly super dark wort for over 2.5 hours before calling it a day, because it was just getting very late. We've been mashing and boiling for all second half of the day. At the end of the day, we'd not only reached our volume, we've also hit 1151 original gravity. So I think we're set, and this stout was in good shape to ferment and then add into a barrel. The beer was fermented in Greg's Conicals. He has 2, and then we had a final gravity of 1048 or 1046, somewhere around there, reaching about 13.8% ABV before going into the barrel. And then we transferred that into our wonderful whiskey barrel, which unwrapped this bad boy at my house, and we slowly racked the beer in there and left it for quite a while, tasting it here and there. Here's what I have in my tasting notes. 4 months in, a little oak, lots of stout, not much booze or bourbon yet. Guys, you want to make sure you taste your stout all the time. You don't want to just set it and forget it, because you could easily over oak it. You could take it out too early. You want it to be just right. And by the way, a little note on smaller format barrels, also known as non-55-gallon barrels. You could easily over oak your beer because it has a smaller surface area, especially 5-gallon barrels. They have almost twice as much surface area as regular barrels. So at that point, 6 months is plenty aging time, and is equivalent to about 1 year of age in a full barrel. So 15-gallon barrels is somewhere in between 5 and 55. We estimated about 6 to 10 months of aging time. So 6 months in, I tasted the beer again, and the bourbon and oak was really starting to come through, although it was still tasting kind of mellow. So we decided to leave it in for a bit longer. And then 8 months in, tasting it again, it's absolute go time. The beer tasted like really good, even though it was uncarbonated and it wasn't totally cold. So it wasn't boozy. The booziness was right. The bourbon was right. It was tasting like a very good barrel-aged stout. So we decided it was time to pull. So yeah, make sure you don't leave your beers in the barrel for too long, because you could easily over oak. So it's just acquire too much oak from the barrel, and then it will mellow slightly, but all of it will never go away. I still have a couple of beers that I over oaked on my second ever barrel. And I still refuse to drink them because 2 years later, the oak is still heavy. But if it is too boozy, don't worry, the booziness will fade, especially as you add maybe some sweetness for lactose or some coconut, which adds an inherent sweetness of its own. That will mellow the booziness a little bit with time. So in the end, the beer sat in the barrel for 8 months, and we each kegged about 4.5 gallons due to barrel absorbing some of the beer. And I do apologize, all the man butts in that video. This is bordering on some questionable OnlyFans content, so subscribe for more if you're into that. So yeah, out of 4-something gallons, I left 2 gallons on Mexican vanilla beans, which I sliced and diced and put in a bunch of bourbon and aged it for about 3 or 4 months before putting all of that tincture in a keg and putting the beans in a muslin bag and also putting that in a keg. And then that's been sitting there for 2 months as of today. The other half of the beer, or bulk of the beer, it was a little more than 2 gallons. I did something crazy for science. So I went with one of my favorite adjunct combinations that I've had on commercial level, which is Phase 3's Unoya 12. And that beer had coconut and a peanut butter combination that tasted absolutely sublime. You had like this flavor of like chocolate ganache or like caramel stroopwafel or some sort of coconut stroopwafel. It was just like a bonkers combination. It didn't taste like the adjuncts themselves, but something more than that as a whole. So here's how I added the coconut into the beer. So I took 3 pounds of coconut that I purchased at Trader Joe's, which is amazing quality, by the way, and I toasted that in my 350-degree oven. So half was toasted for about 20 minutes and half was toasted for about 10 minutes. I wanted a nice mix of toasted coconut and lightly toasted coconut. I actually wanted raw coconut for half of it and toasted coconut for half of it, but I just wanted to make sure I sanitized the coconut a little bit so it doesn't introduce the infection. So I toasted the lighter version of it for about 10 minutes just to be safe. Just to diversify the flavors a little bit and make sure you get a well-rounded flavors from a blend of things. So I threw all of this goodness into 2 muslin bags and I lowered them into the beer and then suspended them with non-scented floss to absorb the flavors. I let the coconut sit for a little more than a week before pulling it out, and oh man, it tasted out of this world. I kind of wish I had just left it there, but no, I had to continue. I had to continue in the name of science. And so we did. At that point, I wanted to add a bunch of peanut butter, and I've added peanut butter in a number of ways, including adding real peanut butter, which was fun. I had to de-oil the peanut butter using a bunch of paper towels, and it was a process and it was a mess. But this method is by far my favorite, which isn't real peanut butter. It's actually using PB2 powder. Mix it in with water. I basically boil a little bit of water in a stove and dissolve some powder in there. And for about 2.5-ish gallons, I used about 5 ounces of PB2, which is most of the container. I dissolved it in heated water in the stove until it was just somewhat liquid, and then I added it into the wort. Yes, this absorbed a whole bunch of beer, and yes, a few of the pints from my keg were pure goo at first, but it was so worth it. The peanut butter flavors are pretty crazy. But that's not it. I found that the combination of PB2 and peanut butter extract, specifically Brewer's Best peanut butter extract, is a crazy combination. So first of all, Brewer's Best peanut butter extract is one of the best in the market, if not the best one, and standalone, it is a very good beer flavoring. Although I think it adds a little bit more peanut butter aroma than the real peanut butter flavor. So I think PB2 really complements the flavor, and the extract complements the aroma. So, but together they are like the winning team that you want in your peanut butter stouts. So yes, I added about 3.5 ounces of Brewer's Best PB flavoring, which was awesome. So yeah, added that straight into fermenter along with a PB2 goop. So without further ado, let's go taste the Mexican vanilla version and let's go taste the adjunct version and see what we think. Let's go. And we're back. So check this out. We have the two versions of the stout. We have the regular Mexican vanilla version here, and then we have the adjuncted version here. And I did make the bottles for the adjuncted version because I thought it came out so good. And I couldn't also wait to use one of my favorite characters on one of my beers, and that's Rinsler from Tron Legacy. Rinsler is such an evil, dark character. I thought it was very fitting because here is all black, and this beer is so jet black and kind of dark and roasty that it's like almost a little abrasive to an extent, but we'll talk about that. But nonetheless, I'm really excited to share my tasty notes with you guys for this. So nonetheless, let's set this aside for now and get into the actual flavor tasting. Not much head, which is kind of a bummer, and I've had this experience with a few barrel-aged beers that I've done. For whatever reason, the foam isn't really prominent. It is more prominent on this version with adjuncts for whatever reason, even though I thought peanuts and all that it's supposed to decrease head, but I've had no such experience, and I've brewed with a number of nut varieties in my past. And yes, that is a coconut floaty, and I will gladly drink it because it's delicious. But first, the Mexican vanilla beer before I ruin my palate with adjuncts. It smells like boozy, brownie, brookie kind of vibe, maybe almost like a rum. It's an interesting bourbon flavor. It's kind of like a liqueur almost. I think I get like a rum brownie type of note. Okay, cool. I'm very glad I got this to warm up, and it's still like 50 degrees. It's still a bit chilly because it's a hot day. Now that it's warm, it's bringing out a lot of the chocolate, like baker's chocolate, and kind of Betty Crocker brownie notes out of this. If you guys ever have Betty Crocker brownies, some of the best, honestly. I mean, Ghirardelli's probably a bit better, but that specific flavor, as I guess, Betty Crocker, try it out sometimes. Cheap brownies can be amazing. Nonetheless, I'm getting some brownie notes, and I'm getting some of that interesting chocolate vanilla. It almost has a little bit of, I don't want to say roasty, but it's kind of like a gritty flavor to it. And I think maybe it's the vanilla beans, or maybe it's the base stout. I did want this beer to finish at about 10:55, and it finished at 10:46, 10:48. Which is fine. I was just expecting a little bit more sweetness out of it, maybe even 1060, which is why we added a crazy amount of roasted malts in there. So maybe it's a little drier than I would like. However, all those issues are resolved with this beer because coconut adds a certain sweetness, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Nonetheless, Mexican vanilla, very interesting, and I wanted to go after some of the marshmallow hangy vibes. It's a big beer from Three Floyds Brewing out in Munster, Indiana. If you guys ever go to Dark Lord Day, shout out to all of you stone gentlemen. It was quite a festival with death metal and huge stouts. Nonetheless, Mexican vanilla is something that Marshmallow Hangy uses, so I was inspired by that beer, and I wanted to put some Mexican vanilla in here and try to replicate some of that flavor. I think if this beer got to 10:55, 10:60, it would be somewhat close in flavor to that Marshmallow Hangy, but right now it's just a little bit gritty and a little bit rough around the edges. But I think it's one of those beers that, you know, with like 6 months or a year, it's really going to mellow out and come into its own. So I'm looking forward to bottling this off and drinking it here in a little bit. We'll see how this ages. And I'll say this, at 10:46 final gravity, or 48, I forget which one. Let's go with 10:47. These beers are still like very thick, very syrupy, but the roastiness kind of offsets that, and it creates this like balance between the sweetness and the beer base. So you don't just get like Hershey syrup. There is that whole like stout in there that, you know, you're not just drinking pure sugar water. It's like you're definitely drinking a beer, and it's like a huge heckin' stout. Nonetheless, I'm going to set the vanilla aside and crack into the star of the show here, which is the coconut and peanut butter version. Here we go. So yes, what I said was true in the last video. I did get a bunch of goop out of the keg for the first few pours, and then it was kind of gritty for a pint after that. But after those first few pints were poured off, man, this is quite a beer. And you can probably see some of the coconut floaties in this coming through still. And this is like, I bottled off like 30 beers, and I poured off a few pints off a keg that I drank personally. And there's still coconut floaties coming, but no regrets. I love coconut, I love peanut butter, and they came together absolutely in an absolutely stunning fashion. Getting like a good roasty stout base, a little bit of sweetness, and a bunch of peanut butter. Peanut butter is definitely the star of the show on the aroma. Let's go for flavor though. Peanut butter and sweetness. It's crazy how much sweeter it is than the Mexican vanilla beer. It's kind of bonkers actually. Okay, a little bit of booziness on the back end. There it is. Okay. Okay, very interesting. So we have like big wafts of peanut butter and a little bit of booziness, and after all that you have this like sweetness that's like juicy coconut that kind of comes through on the end. It's not really the star of the party here after the peanut butter was added. The peanut butter really took over the main stage for like the aroma and the initial taste, but then you get that boozy undertone, and then you get a nice creamy coconut finish, which is absolutely kind of awesome. And I have to say, this is so much sweeter than the vanilla version because it doesn't have that coconut in it. And that's just what coconut does for beers. It takes the beer and it makes it like a little bit sweeter. I don't know what it is and how, but just the flavor and the essence itself adds a perception of sweetness. The final gravity isn't any different on this beer than that one, but it's absolutely fascinating how much more sweetness I perceive here. Man, I gotta say, I'll go back for this beer over any other beer that I have in my cellar or my whole house right now. And I have a whole cellar full of all the hype stouts, Toppling Goliath, all the good stuff. And maybe just because I brew beers the way I like them personally, which I like them to have a little bit of a roasty backbone. I think like Toppling Goliath and all the other guys through Floyd's make great beers, but a lot of them are just like way on the sweeter side. Whereas I like mine sort of in the middle. It's not like really an old school stout by any means, but it's not like super sugary. It's a little somewhere in that middle sphere that has a little slightly roasty backbone. It has that stout component to it, and it has the adjunct component to it. And the adjuncts balance the stout, and they kind of work together to achieve these crazy flavors. We get like peanut butter and coconut and like brownies, and it's all like in one thing, and I love it. So that's why I keep going back for it. And yeah, I think it's just 10 out of 10 for me, me personally. That one probably lacking a little bit for now, but I think with time it's gonna get really good. I would give this one about 7 out of 10, but I would totally brew this again. I'd be curious to try a different barrel with this beer base and actually try to have it finish a little bit sweeter, like 1055. Curious what that do to this beer. Curious if it would shift the balance, but I know it would shift the balance in favor for the vanilla beer. So yeah. So that's my closing thought. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I'll be doing some giveaways of this beer on my Patreon pretty soon. So if you can, please subscribe. If not, please follow me on Instagram. That's free to share all sorts of funky content. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time. Cheers.